The Amazon's extreme conditions create a physiological crisis within hours. Dehydration accelerates in this environment, with the body losing fluids faster than in most other wilderness areas. The canopy's density blocks sunlight, creating disorientation that compounds the physical stress. Unlike temperate forests, the Amazon's uniform appearance makes navigation exceptionally difficult without landmarks. The 72-hour survival window represents the critical period before severe dehydration and exhaustion become irreversible. This environment's combination of heat, humidity, and scale creates what survival experts call a perfect storm of wilderness hazards. The body's cooling mechanisms fail in such humidity, leading to rapid heat exhaustion even without physical exertion. What makes one case different involves specific survival strategies that counter these environmental pressures. Survival in extreme environments often requires a complete mental reframing of the situation. Instead of viewing the wilderness as a hostile force to be conquered, successful survivors learn to see it as a resource. This cognitive shift transforms every element, from the largest tree to the smallest insect, into a potential tool for sustenance, shelter, or navigation. The smallest inhabitants, like insects and grubs, become critical sources of protein and fat when larger game is scarce or impossible to catch. Knowledge of which species are edible, which can provide medicinal benefits, or which indicate nearby water is part of this environmental toolkit. This approach reduces panic and wasted energy, allowing for systematic problem solving under prolonged duress. Endurance over weeks, rather than mere days, becomes possible when one stops fighting the environment and starts working with it. The Amazon's heat and humidity create a constant, energy-sapping environment where dehydration can set in within hours. Unlike cold climates where hypothermia is the primary threat, the body here loses water rapidly through sweat, a critical survival mechanism that can quickly become a liability. Caloric expenditure accelerates in this environment. The body burns energy just to maintain core temperature and navigate difficult terrain. Insect-borne diseases like malaria or dengue fever pose a silent, ever-present risk, capable of debilitating a person even with adequate food and water. Finding safe drinking water is a monumental challenge, as many natural sources can harbor parasites or bacteria. This combination of factors, heat stress, hydration crisis, disease vectors, and caloric deficit, creates a survival timeline measured in days, not weeks. The individual's survival strategy centered on deep environmental observation rather than confrontation. This approach required identifying edible plants and safe water sources through careful study of local flora. Understanding microclimates and animal behavior patterns became crucial for navigation and avoiding hazards. The strategy involved conserving energy through strategic rest periods during the hottest parts of the day.
This method mirrors documented survival principles where adaptation proved more sustainable than force.
The granular understanding included recognizing insect activity as indicators of water proximity. Bird calls and flight patterns provided navigation cues and warnings about approaching weather changes. This survival methodology represents a systematic application of environmental literacy under extreme duress. The survivor's first critical decision was securing water, a fundamental survival priority. He identified specific types of vines known to store water internally, a technique documented in survival training. This method accesses relatively clean water filtered by the plant's natural systems, avoiding contaminated surface sources. Such knowledge transforms a desperate situation. Finding water can extend survival from mere days to several weeks. The decision highlights a pattern in extreme survival, addressing physiological needs in order of immediate threat. Without this initial step, the body's systems begin to fail rapidly, making any subsequent efforts nearly impossible. The rainforest, while teeming with life, presents a harsh reality for human survival. Many plants and animals are toxic, indigestible, or pose significant danger. This scarcity of readily available, safe food sources creates a critical survival equation. Focusing on specific insects, like certain large ant species, becomes a calculated nutritional strategy. Leafcutter ants, for example, are a known, reliable source of essential protein and fats. This represents a pragmatic adaptation to an environment where calories are a precious, hard-won resource. In survival situations, insects can provide essential nutrients when other food sources are unavailable. The individual reportedly collected insects, removing heads and stingers to prevent irritation before consumption. This wasn't for taste preference, but for sheer caloric and protein intake to prevent catastrophic muscle loss. In extreme survival scenarios, maintaining muscle mass is critical for physical function and long-term survival. The third survival priority involved shelter construction and signaling for potential rescue. A basic shelter was constructed from palm fronds to provide insulation from rain and some protection from insects. Such shelters serve dual purposes: protection from elements and creating a visible marker for search teams. These survival methods follow established priorities: water, food, shelter, and signaling in that order. The survivor maintained a smoky fire when possible, a practical survival technique with multiple functions. The smoke served to repel insects, a common problem in wilderness environments that can lead to disease and constant discomfort. It also functioned as a potential signal, though the dense forest canopy significantly reduced its visibility from the air. This highlights a common challenge in search and rescue. Terrain and vegetation can severely limit the effectiveness of visual signals. Surviving alone for over 6 weeks represents an extreme psychological marathon. Beyond the physical ordeal, mental fortitude in such isolation involves managing fear, maintaining hope, and adhering to a survival routine against despair. The psychological strain of prolonged solitude is a documented phenomenon, where the mind becomes its own greatest challenge. This combination of practical skill and psychological resilience defines the boundary between survival and succumbing to the environment. In survival situations, maintaining a strict daily routine serves a critical psychological function. Tasks like collecting water and foraging for edible insects provide structure that combats apathy and despair. This psychological mechanism is documented in survival psychology. Routine prevents the fatal spiral of hopelessness. The shelter maintenance represents more than physical protection. It's an ongoing commitment to survival. This contrasts with common misconceptions about survival being primarily about dramatic rescues or extreme skills. The psychological boundaries of this story are as important as the physical ones. What keeps someone going when hope seems lost? In documented cases, this structured approach has proven more sustainable than relying on bursts of adrenaline or luck. The foraging for ants and grubs demonstrates how survival often depends on adapting to available resources, not ideal conditions. The exact location and identity of the man remain undisclosed to protect his privacy, a common practice in such cases. His separation from society was not a single dramatic event, but a gradual process with circumstances not detailed publicly. While the consumption of ants makes for a sensational headline, it was merely one component of a broader, complex foraging system. This system likely included a variety of available resources such as fruits, palm hearts, and other insect grubs for nutritional balance. A major public misconception is the constant threat from large predators, which is often exaggerated in survival narratives. In reality, such encounters are rare, and survival often depends more on avoiding illness, finding consistent food, and maintaining shelter. This pattern aligns with documented survival mechanisms, where diversified foraging reduces risk and predator evasion is a situational, not constant, concern. The story, stripped of sensationalism, reveals a more grounded struggle for sustenance and isolation within a vast, indifferent ecosystem. Contrary to popular imagination, large predators like jaguars typically avoid human contact in wilderness settings. The true dangers in such environments are often invisible and cumulative rather than dramatic. Dehydration can incapacitate a person within days in tropical heat, impairing judgment and physical function. Minor cuts or insect bites can lead to severe infections without access to basic medical care. Parasites and vector-borne illnesses like malaria or dengue fever are constant threats in many wilderness areas. Survival in such conditions becomes a daily battle against exhaustion, sickness, and environmental stressors. This reality contrasts sharply with sensationalized narratives of wilderness survival. The gradual, systemic nature of these threats makes them particularly challenging to overcome. The medical aftermath of such an ordeal remains largely unknown, but survival comes at a tremendous physical cost. Extreme weight loss is common in survival scenarios, depleting the body's energy reserves and muscle mass. Potential organ stress occurs as the body redirects resources to maintain critical functions during prolonged deprivation. Parasitic loads from contaminated environments can cause additional health complications during recovery. Long-term recovery requires extensive medical intervention, nutritional support, and psychological care. This case offers concrete lessons for understanding survival priorities that extend far beyond specific environments. The survival mindset involves prioritizing water, shelter, and signaling over other concerns in emergency situations. Psychological resilience proves as critical as physical endurance in prolonged survival scenarios. The rule of threes is a fundamental principle in survival training, outlining the critical timeframes for human endurance. It states that a person can survive approximately 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in harsh conditions, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. This hierarchy dictates the immediate order of priorities for anyone in a life-threatening situation. The subject's actions in this case directly mirrored this established survival protocol. First, securing immediate shelter from the elements was the critical initial response. Next came a relentless, focused search for a source of potable water. Only after these more urgent needs were addressed did the long-term work of foraging for calories begin. This sequential focus demonstrates a practical application of survival theory under extreme duress. This principle of seeing ecosystems rather than obstacles is a documented survival mechanism. In survival psychology, this cognitive reframing allows individuals to identify resources where others see only threats or barriers. The anthill becomes a protein source, a practical application of entomophagy, or insect eating, practiced in many cultures for sustenance. The vine transforms into a water container, utilizing the natural properties of certain plant species that can store or guide water. This mindset shift is not about ignoring danger, but about systematically cataloging potential assets within the environment. It contrasts with a fixed mindset that categorizes environmental features purely as problems to be avoided or overcome. Military survival training and wilderness courses often teach this resource-oriented perception to improve odds in austere conditions. The core mechanism is perceptual adaptation, where the brain learns to filter the environment for utility rather than just for threat. This ability to reassemble your environment into a set of usable components is the core of the survivor's mindset. This cognitive process involves breaking down overwhelming situations into manageable, actionable parts. It is a documented psychological strategy observed in individuals who have endured prolonged adversity. The second principle is that routine is a lifeline. In extreme isolation, a simple daily schedule acts as a psychological anchor. This structure provides a sense of control and normalcy when external circumstances are chaotic or absent. Such routines are common coping mechanisms in documented cases of survival, imprisonment, or involuntary seclusion. Together, these mental frameworks, reassembly and routine, form a critical defense against psychological disintegration. This mental discipline prevents catastrophic spiraling, ensuring essential tasks are completed even when motivation disappears. Basic survival functions like finding water, maintaining shelter, and signaling for help must continue regardless of emotional state. Preparation becomes non-negotiable in remote environments, where survival depends on foresight rather than luck. Informing others of your route and timeline creates a critical safety net, allowing rescuers to know where to search. Carrying signaling devices like mirrors, whistles, or satellite messengers can dramatically increase rescue chances. Even rudimentary knowledge of local edible plants and water sources can sustain life while awaiting rescue. This preparation gap often determines whether an incident becomes a rescue story or a recovery operation. The difference between survival and tragedy frequently comes down to these basic, methodical preparations. This narrative examines how focused knowledge application, rather than supernatural ability, determines survival in extreme situations. Adaptability becomes the critical mechanism when facing unfamiliar or hostile environments, requiring constant assessment and adjustment. The human body's physiological responses to stress and deprivation demonstrate remarkable tenacity when properly managed through mental discipline. Environmental reading involves pattern recognition, identifying water sources, shelter opportunities, and potential hazards through observable clues. This contrasts with mere endurance, which often leads to depletion without strategic resource management and environmental understanding. Documented survival cases consistently show that mental refusal to quit activates physiological reserves otherwise inaccessible in normal conditions. The application of specialized knowledge transforms random environmental elements into usable resources through systematic processing. This approach creates a sustainable interaction with challenging environments rather than temporary resistance against them.
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.